We do. It looks like that time of call to order for the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission meeting. For roll call. Frank Thorwald.
Bill Feierabend.
Stephen Cooper.
Dale Nations.
We have a quorum. Approval for the minutes of the meeting of March 7th. Do I have a motion for approval?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? The ayes have it. Any conflict of interest? Hearing no conflict of interest, let's move on to the presentation by Ranger Development, LLC.
I'm going to drag a wire across the floor here for the connection to the projector, so if anybody has to get up, be aware of that.
Rick, before you start,
Yes.
This is Dale. I'd like to get clarified a couple of points before your presentation, in case I get cut off. The notices have been posted, of course. We did that. Have all the adjoining lessees been sent a copy of the application?
There are no adjoining lessees. We are the of record that are out
right.
there. We've got control of the position around it. As you know, to the north, there are some open lands up there that are unleased that we left there because they're structurally, I think I indicated to you the other day that it's not a precedence for us to have that up there.
So no objections have been posted, is that right?
No objections have been posted to my knowledge. If Dale or Niall, has any objections been posted?
No, I'm not aware of any. I'm sorry, I was talking with Kurt there.
Okay, let me expose my ignorance now. I'm looking at this land plat. It appears there are other leaseholders.
As to what else?
I see all these names listed.
Those are our lessors. They're not lessees.
Oh, I see.
Those are lessors. I believe you're.
Okay. Yeah. All right. That explains it.
Yeah, we gave a full rundown of everybody in there that we've got leased. Like it says there, Pap and Pop and 3MJK. Those are lessors that we have.
Okay. Well, see, I exposed my ignorance then. I didn't understand that land.
Such as underneath Section 34, we have the Arizona state lease, and that being our lessor would be the state of Arizona. And
okay,
that's how we posted that. We've gave out all the information on there.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry to interrupt that.
No.
You go ahead with your presentation. I'd like to say one thing about it. It's a beautiful piece of work. So I wish I was there to watch it, but I've got it before me, a printed copy. So
yeah, that's something you guys might try to do, is just tell us when we're like flipping the slides so Dale can flip his pages.
Okay, definitely. First of all, I'm Rick Porter, and I'm with Twin Bridges. Twin Bridges is based in Denver, Colorado, and with me today is also one of my partners, David Wallace from Denver. And then we've got Tony Hines is with us, and Tony is the operations manager for this project for us through Ranger Development. And Ranger Development is a 50-50 venture between Twin Bridges and IACX as partners. And we've done this whole project as partners from day one. And then Kurt Kostenius works with us as a generating geologist, geophysicist. Kurt is based out of Tucson, Arizona, and I've worked with Kurt for a long time on various projects through the Rockies and things. So what we wanted to do initially was just give you kind of an overview and of the helium project. We've been working up here now, I think going on 3.5, 4 years. Time flies, and I know we've been working with Joe Dixon over the time with the State Land Department, picking up the leasehold, and then we went through the different realms through administrators with and now with Niall at the survey handling this. So we're glad to be able to present to you today kind of the overview and then go through the spacing exceptions for these wells and tell you what we've done up here so far a little bit. So I'm going to let Kurt kind of take it from here and say a little bit about our project.
So we have two presentations today. One is just a general overview. And Dale, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay, good. So the first will just give you some idea of what the project is, and these are actually slides that I use to convince our management, you know, how to enter this project. But anyway, so sort of orientation, and helium is sort of somewhat of an unusual commodity for people to deal with, so we'll provide, you know, what background information we can with that. And then we'll switch to the second part of the presentation, which deals with the issue at question, and we'll show some what's called seismic reflection data. It's a tool kind of like using ultrasound on the Earth that allows us to see the subsurface rock layers and what their depths and how they're formed and arranged, and show that how that relates to our recommendation. So it's I guess the audience is called whether you want the lights on or off. I think it's showing up fairly clearly.
I'm fine with them on.
Okay.
You get in the back?
Yeah.
Great.
So the
Slide 2.
slide 2. Now you're in charge. You can be the speaker.
You can just say next slide or something and they'll keep up.
Okay. By the way, do I have to point this at the thing to do it?
No, you don't. It's
Okay.
RF.
Okay. So the prior to our efforts here, potash was, as you are all aware, was a hot commodity, and I've just taken a figure from one of their reports, but it shows where shows where it's this one here. Shows what we call the Holbrook Basin here. I put a little star where our Pinadome Navajo Springs project area is near the city of Holbrook, Arizona. And helium was discovered there in the early 1950s, and starting around 1961, it started to be extracted and marketed by Kerr McGee at a plant based at Navajo, Arizona. And I'll show you an interesting graph later, but that for about a 15-year period, there was marketing of helium from two fields, one called Pinadome, the other called Navajo Springs. And those fields are some of the, in terms of concentrations of helium, are some of the richest in the world. They have, on the order of the gas that's produced, the gas consists of mostly nitrogen, which is most of our atmosphere. It's about 90%, 92% nitrogen, but about 8% helium, and it has just traces of other gases in it. So it's a very attractive place to produce helium. So I often tell some people that Arizona's in a way the Saudi Arabia of helium. So in terms of concentrations, it is, and obviously there's other helium resources up on the Navajo reservation. But anyway, we're looking at helium percentages on the order of 8% from a formation called the Coconino Sandstone, and that's a prominent sandstone that you can see sort of forming the rims around Sedona. So just moving in a little closer, so the Holbrook, Arizona here.
Next slide.
I missed your call. So the interstate going through here, I-40, of the national park or monument here, petrified forest, and then it's expanded boundary here. And we're up in this very northeastern corner of this greater Holbrook Basin area. And Next slide. The helium that is found there, this is a diagram showing and by the way, if I get too geologic, just feel free to ask any questions if I'm not clear. But in terms of what we call the stratigraphy or the layering of rocks, at Pinadome, the Chinle Shale, which is where all the petrified forests, fossil wood comes from and trees, is at the surface. And then helium is found in what's called the Shinnerup conglomerate and the Coconino sandstone. And just like in oil and gas systems, helium is a very mobile gas. If it escapes into the atmosphere, it goes right into space. So you need something to seal that in as it's emanating or diffusing through the earth. You need a way to trap it. And the seals are these bentonitic shales and mudstones in the Chinle Shale, and then also similar shales and hydrites, like gypsum salt beds in the Moenkopi Formation. Those are the two important elements that are allowing us to have a trap here. Now I just mentioned that probably the source, it's unclear whether the source is but it's probably coming from the Earth's crust through radioactive decay, or it can be coming from the Earth's mantle through the volcanic rocks that sort of dot the area around Sholo, over to Springerville, and then north of Holbrook, in the volcanic areas there. But there are other little shows of helium in little pockets in what's called the Supai Formation. A lot of that makes the red rocks that you see around Sedona. So that's the kind of an introduction of the stratigraphy there. In looking at boreholes that penetrate the Earth, we can lower what they call electrical logs. I was from Northwest Montana originally, and when I first worked on an oil rig, they said they're bringing out the logging truck. Well, I thought a logging truck would carry, cut timber to the sawmill. But anyway, these electrical logs, here's one that measures there's electrical properties shown here, and this one's a little bit different. It's sort of telling us what maybe you could say salinity of the waters are. But they define two of our reservoirs here, the Shinnerup Formation here and the Coconino Sandstone here. And then above the Coconino is the seal that we call the Moenkopi. And the sand is giving us this sort of left excursion of the plot, and the shale is further to the right. And then this other porous formation here gives us an excursion there. So just a brief, so we can use these subsurface tools to help us understand what fluids are in the rocks and what the rocks are composed of. So sandstones give us these deflections of the curves, and the shales, it tracks closer to the center. Okay, so the summary then is two major formations of interest, and the one that we're mostly targeting or interested in, at least historically, is the Coconino Sandstone. Okay, next slide. And I just mentioned some of this. So in some way, shape, or form, the source of the helium is coming from either deep in the earth or in the Earth's crust, and maybe even in some of the sedimentary layers. But in some way, shape, or form, it's working its way up into the Coconino Sandstone, which is a major aquifer in the area. And I'll show you a slide later there's a very unusual aspect to these fields, and it shows the interrelation of water. But it's Ranger's technical team's assessment that the Coconino Sandstone, that this aquifer has facilitated the transfer of the helium and the concentration of it. In other words, to summarize, there's just individual molecules and trace amounts coming up into the Coconino, but there's a process going on that's allowing it to be concentrated into these 8% helium up in the northeast corner of the basin.
And Kurt, that's a saline aquifer, not a freshwater aquifer.
Correct. Yep.
Is there, presumably it's called Navajo Springs because there's springs there. If I go take a water sample, can I analyze it for helium and find? anomalous helium, do you know?
Um,
Has anybody ever done that?
they haven't done that. I doubt you would find anything because the helium probably has escaped, but there might be traces,
Okay.
but not significant.
Just curious.
things.
Yeah, I was just curious. Okay.
You have an interesting point that relates to the structure of Pinadome and Navajo Springs.
Okay.
So, okay, so next slide. So that, like any project, there's a lot of historical data that was very useful for us. And during the development of that field, there was or subsequent to it, there was a summary done in a what they call a geologic guidebook. Different geological societies maybe have a meeting and then produce a guidebook from it. And Allen published this in 1978, and it just chronicles some of the properties of this field that are important. And I'll just mention a few here, but the Coconino sandstone is one of the best reservoirs in the world. It's primarily formed by the aeolian sands, in other words, fossil sand dunes, and particularly if you go to Canyon de Chelly, you can see those. They're spectacular. And what it means is that we have porosity he lists 14%. Our data shows it could be as high as 18%. That's very high. And then what's also equally important is the permeability. It's 110 millidarcies. That number doesn't mean anything to you, but that's to produce gas. You can produce gas in way less than a single millidarcy or even half a millidarcy. So we have what the helium gas is stored in is a very prolific and reservoir to produce it from. Let's see, next slide.
Who published the guidebook? Was that Arizona Geological Society?
It was it's either the Four Corners Geological.
That would make sense.
Yeah, I think it's Four Corners, which is kind of a collaborative New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, Utah society. So here's what's called a structured contour map. So on top of this Coconino sandstone, it's basically a structural dome, and so this is much like looking like a topographic map, but it's just showing us under the earth what the shape of the structure is in terms of these contour lines. So that here they're showing that at 4,790 feet, that is the high part of the structure, and then these at 20-foot intervals, you're stepping down deeper and deeper as you go to the northeast. It's somewhat you're to the west. It's heading off slightly shallowly. Same to the south, and then they show a large fault that's going through here. I should mention these are section lines here for scale, and here's section 34 and section 3, the two sections in question in today's meeting. And then to the south of that fault, there's another dome. We've given this one the nickname Mustang Dome. We think it actually potentially has a separate accumulation of gas. The yellow dots are the wells that were produced at the time, and I won't count them out now, but I think there are about 9 productive wells at Pinadome, of which several of these were I think this was the second and third largest producing helium wells in the state of Arizona. So they were very, very prolific wells during the time that they produced. I want you to put kind of a snapshot of this one for the next presentation, but just remember that this was mapped in the 60s and early 70s as a dome, just a large, broad arching of rocks cut by a fault, and then there was another dome to the southeast. Because when we do this seismic data, this sort of ultrasound of the Earth, you're going to see a different picture, and it's very pertinent to why we're requesting the spacing exception. The other thing is notice that they obviously didn't, in 1950s and 60s when they drilled these wells, they weren't too worried about setbacks from section lines and things like that. And it's not just historical. These wells are pivotal to our understanding of the field, and so we play off the information that those wells provide. So when we're looking at developing the field, using the information from these, even before we shot the seismic, I knew I wanted to drill a well right between those two wells. So anyway, so the template of our section township range grid doesn't necessarily coincide with what the earth has provided. That's the first point. And the second point is the way the field was logistically developed in the 50s and 60s doesn't necessarily, it provides an additional constraint that influences our interpretation of the field. Okay.
Kurt, before you go on,
Yeah.
are those thematic in that the size of the yellow wells indicate the production?
Yes. For instance, this well here, I have to come in closer to the numbers. So I think this well here, I don't know if he has a scale on here. These are an mmCF per day. So this is 142 versus 115 versus this is 3.8.
What do you consider sort of broadly cut off in the helium business? You know, obviously 3.8 is less than 115, but what sort of gets your attention? 1 or 2 or 3.8 or?
Yeah, I don't have a number off the top of my head for that, but
Okay. More is better.
More is better.
more is better. I mean, we're happy with.
And now it's better than then.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
fair enough.
We should mention something. This well here, it's called the KM172. We tend to use the state permit number as our shorthand. Other states use a different way of describing wells, but anyway, the Kerr-McGee 172 well, which was, I believe, the Macy number 2 well, was drilled in 1950, and that's the discovery well for the field. And that well, when drilled in 1950, I think it was in August, they drilled it with what was called a cable tool rig. And the cable tool rig, the way it functioned, it didn't have what we now call a blowout preventer. So if you're and in the old movies, you always see the gusher coming out. So when they struck a high pressure pocket of oil or gas, it just came out. Well, when they were drilling this well, when they penetrated the Coconino, they were producing 10 million cubic feet of gas a day. And it was just being vented to the atmosphere. And I don't know, so you can maybe do the calculation. Or
It's a big number.
It's a big number, and it did that for a month until they got a gas analysis back, because they thought, well, it doesn't burn, so we don't care. And then when they got a gas analysis back from the U.S. Bureau of Mines, the government said, you need to, shut that well in, because that's a, strategic resource. So anyway, that was an interesting tidbit about that field. But the KM172, you'll hear me reference that in the next presentation. That's a key data point for us, not only because it was the second largest producing well, but also because it has this historic significance, and it also has influence on how we understand what we call the structural geology of the dome. In other words, what's the shape of this dome? Okay, so next slide.
Just real quick, so
Okay.
just to be double sure, the yellow is TD in feet, so these really are not deep wells.
Good point.
1,000,
Yeah.
I mean, I usually think oil and gas, 5 or 10,000 feet. You're under 2,000, well under, it's really not deep drilling you're talking about here.
That's correct. Yeah, the Shinnerup target's going to be about 800 to 850 feet, and the Coconino's roughly about 1,000 feet. So that's a great point. Thank you for bringing that up. So yeah, shallow wells, so it affects the drilling economics of producing this. This is what's called I'll flip
Next
to the-
slide.
I'll flip to the next slide after this one, but this is what's called they've actually made a map on the, so usually in any field, gas field, there's a fluid sitting under the gas. It can either be oil or it can be water, and in our case it's water. And here it's very unusual. It's actually sloped. It's sloping to the northeast. So here where they kind of first encounter it, it's about 47-70 feet. And it drops 200 feet as you head roughly three miles to the northeast. And okay, next slide. Let's make a picture. This is better. So So here's a geologic cross-section going from, in the lower left corner is an index map, but going roughly from the west-southwest to the east-northeast across the field. And here's the, this would be the discovery well, the Kerr-McGee-Macy number 2 well here, and here's the Kerr-McGee-Macy number 3 well here. So starting on the left side, you can see this Eastern Petroleum State well had no gas in it. By the way, here, this is the top of the Coconino here. And then here's the contact between the gas and the water. So everything in this gray shaded zone is the gas. So this becomes a very important thing, because when we drill our well in section 3, we're going to be looking at potentially what remains would be potentially much thinner than when we drill at a location here between these wells where the gas pocket could be much thicker. So those are important considerations for us. This is very unusual. Most places in the world, the gas water contact would be flat across here. But the aquifer is pushing on this bubble of gas, so to speak, and it's displacing it to the northeast off the crest of the dome. So it turns out you can actually get, in a sense, a thicker gas pocket by going off the crest of the dome to the northeast than you can if you drill potentially on the perfect structural crest in places, which is very unusual.
Do you have chemical analyses on the water?
We have some. The water here's, in terms of, I'm not an expert on waters, but it's the total dissolved solids vary between about 35,000 and 42,000 on the few analyses that we've done. Okay, so next slide. Oh, there's a picture of the plant, and so the Kerr-McGee operated that plant starting in around 1961, and then it was terminated production in 1976. It was pretty much effectively done producing by 1974. You'll see an interesting graph next. One of the interesting things that they did is that the plant was designed to, the gas was transported up to, I guess, up to about 5 miles pipeline, 3 to 5 miles depending on your well location, to this location here. And then the gas was processed and obviously marketed. They ended up not being able to test the pressures of each of the wells. This became a kind of an issue later, because we're trying to understand how much gas. You have a balloon under the earth, you've vented a bunch of gas out of it. You'd like to kind of know what the pressure is today, or when they ended their production. But this letter here, and this is from the state files from the Arizona survey, by the way, which is very well organized in terms of the files, made the project very much easier to work on. This is a letter to the state saying we can't give you individual well pressure measurements because everything's all the way the system is plumbed. And that became sort of there's still a risk in this that, we don't understand how much gas is left there. So there is a sort of wildcatting thing to this, so that we know that the field was operated. We have an estimate of how much gas they thought they had to begin with. They then sucked a lot of gas out. We don't know how much pressure dropped because of this, the way they were operating in the field. So when we drill these wells, there's no certainty about how much gas is going to be left in the field. So there's some risk that we're taking in drilling these wells. This was my associate Andrew Payton made this at my request, and this was a very pivotal, in a lot of the literature in the state correspondence and the public's perception is that when the field was closed in 1976, that it had depleted all the gas from the field. There's no gas left, and you'll see reference that in a number of articles and individual letters. But if you look at the overall production of helium, you'll see an interesting similarity here. So so this graph starts in 1960 and goes through 1976. Did I say next page? So Dale, are you on the graph?
Yeah, I'm there.
Okay. So if you look at the total production of gas from the field, you'll see that it peaks around 1968, and then it goes off a little bit, but it's sort of reached maybe a crude plateau in a way, and then it heads in free fall starting in about 1972 until it's terminated here. So that's the red curve we're looking at. The individual production of the wells is shown on all these curves on the bottom, and the well numbers are identified on the right side here. But you can look at at this well in brown is a good one here. You can see that in '68 it really ramped up production. It stayed pretty high, and then it sharply is curtailed. It's not really when gas is being depleted out of a well in the earth, it usually kind of goes off what a mathematician would say is asymptotically, kind of a slow decline. And this curve here and this curve here, they're just kind of plummeting, which looked very artificial to me. And you can see the overall field obviously is doing the same thing. If we were to plot the world production of gas, it does exactly the same thing. But the interesting thing about this commodity is the price is controlled by the government at this time. So there couldn't really be a price collapse like we see today and like with oil. So so the question is this reflecting that the gas was depleted from the field, or is it just market conditions? Well, we looked at some historical data. A friend of mine is John Spencer, who just retired from the Arizona survey, and he mentioned to me something interesting. He said, oh yeah, the helium production, he said that was affected by the Nixon administration terminating all the contracts. And I thought, well, that's interesting. So if we look at the history of the field, in 1960, Congress passed what was called the Helium Amendment, which was intended to build a stockpile of a strategic reserve of helium for our country. And you'll read some of that in the newspaper today. And David, you can hop in any time here on
Well, all the solid rocket fueled engines were hydrogen had to be purged with helium for the space program, for the Cold War, the arms buildup. And when you have one molecule of oxygen, you have an Apollo, whatever it was that blew up the rocket on the
Apollo
pad.
13.
In which case, helium was, at the height of the Cold War, was extremely important to the space race. And so they had real strategic parameters around it. And about the time the space shuttle comes in, we don't need any more helium, right? And we kind of think, big picture, that's kind of what was going on here.
Yep.
And also, they had a cryogenic plant there, and the abandonment pressure, plus the plant pressure that you need relative to the technology that we're going to employ is quite different. In which case, the parameters of how much helium that they could recover, combined with the idea that the price now is about 10 times higher than it was at the time, at least 10 times higher. And you got this the strategic necessity of the space program using all this helium. Well, all those things come together to say, well, this doesn't make any sense anymore, and that's what we think happened in the mid-70s.
Well, we're pretty certain of that in terms of a couple things. So you'll see that the plunge. Here's Apollo 11, man walking on the moon. You'll see shortly after that we hit the precipice in terms of that. And so what this 1960 Act did, though, is on here is the start of Apollo, so you can see that, plus the Cold War issues. But in 1960 allowed for the privatization. In other words, private companies could sell gas to the government. And so this opened up a whole world of people, and it created a vast oversupply. So in 1974, and there were probably some tremors leading up to this, the U.S. government canceled all the contracts, just terminated, the Nixon administration terminated all the purchase contracts. So obviously the market fell out of the system. Well, why is that important for us is that our belief, and I guess we proven this with the Navajo Springs well, is that there's still residual gas left in the fields. The fields were not depleted of gas. They were merely shut in and abandoned, and there's still gas left in the field. So that's why this little graph was important to us.
How rapidly do you think the gas is reaccumulating in there?
I think that basically
I like the way you think there, Frank.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm being hopeful. It's not, is it millions of years like oil, or is it a shorter period, given the way this is working?
I really can't answer that, but so there's two issues. One is we think the balloon that they emptied, they didn't empty it all the way, and we think that there's probably in the order of 1 billion cubic feet of gross gas left in each field, something on that order. We haven't done when we drill these wells, following those, we can do some engineering studies that'll help us understand that better. I don't know if there's any scientific basis for what you just proposed, but I've certainly thought of that. And here's the thinking is that the helium gas is dissolved in groundwater, and in the third presentation you'll see its effect. And there's been sort of an equilibrium state out here where the gas has been on the order of 125 pounds of pressure, and let's say we lowered it to 60. Well, then if you're a molecule of helium sitting in the water there, when the pressure lowers, you might want to come out of solution. So I think there is an argument to be made like you just made.
Well, I asked the question because of what you said in the first place. If it's coming from the mantle still exists.
Yeah, that's probably going to be, that process will be much slower, but warehoused in the water beneath the field, there's a lot of helium dissolved in the water. So that it could come out of solution once we lower the pressure in the field.
And there's something that now is just going on here that's strange. Most of the world's helium accumulation, a project that's getting a lot of publicity, you can read about on the internet, in Siberia, is 0.26% helium. Granted, it's a great deal of gas, but it's on the magnitude of something quite lower. And most of the projects we're looking at in the domestic United States, 1% helium is good. This is strange, and we've had some being 8 to 10% helium. We've had some internal debates along the lines that you're suggesting that maybe there's something going on with the plumbing where as an example, Denbikia Field on the Navajo Reservation has made more gas than the container will hold. It begs the question, is it coming in as fast as you can produce it from somewhere? I mean, that's granted a crazy, wild, happy scenario. We don't think that. But, I think there is some chance that what Kurt's saying, dissolved helium and or the potential that, the whole plumbing system and where the gas is coming from has, over the course of the last, 40 years, there's more gas there than we don't know. And so we're trying to figure that out.
Really what you're saying is geologic processes that concentrate the helium in your sand reservoirs, like all geologic processes, are really sloppy. So you're going to have helium all through that geologic column in 3 dimensions and to varying concentrations, and maybe as you pop the cork over here, some of this helium that's in this 3-dimensional thing can enter in the system, although you don't count it originally.
Well, if Dale, I just went back to the geologic cross section. So they started with a bubble of helium here. We believe it was concentrated by the motion of the water in the aquifer.
Yeah.
One of the questions that everybody's always focused on the helium, I was always focused on the nitrogen, because 80% of this reservoir or 92% is nitrogen. I thought that's really strange for it to be all nitrogen. And the model that there's several models, but the model that I think is intriguing for this area is that the nitrogen is a carrier gas for helium. So when I'm a water droplet up at Sholo and I go into the ground and I enter the coconino and I have some nitrogen in me, as I pass by a helium molecule on my way to north, through the Holbrook Basin, I'm gonna suck up that helium molecule. and eventually I'm going to be transported to Pinadome and Avo Springs, and then I'm released there. The pressure of this field when they discovered it was about 125 pounds. We probably lowered it to something like 60 when they produced it. So that means that if there was any water here enriched in helium, that helium could come out of solution. So that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
And you don't know which isotope of helium you're getting there, do you? Or which types of isotopes?
We don't.
There's been some more broad work in the general area about, if you're interested in, you're talking about helium-3 and the relative difference in concentration relative to other places. And from what I gather, it's higher, but still it's not to the degree that we're going to try to figure out what we can do. I mean, I'm sure you've probably seen that China's trying to mine helium-3 on the moon, and everybody talking about fusion right down the road and how valuable helium-3 is about. Oh, well, some large, I want to say it's $10,000. I don't know. I don't even know what I'm talking about. It's really expensive, and it would be great to think that at some point we would look at that, but we never.
So,
we never thought in those.
Yeah, but at 8% statistically, that number should be.
Oh yeah.
yeah. So your question is the ratio. Maybe I can get back to the group about what we sent our colleague Scott. His whole family's been into helium for years, and they've sent some of the gas to a lab in Scotland who's been focusing on like a global study of helium. And they gave sort of a murky answer. I just went through it the other day. I was kind of reading this and didn't fully understand it. But the one thing I did understand, their conclusion was that water had an intimate role in in helium in a number of fields in Western North America. So. Okay, so that's kind of the overview of helium, and so next we can focus on Pinadome.
Going into that, I want Tony just to make a couple of comments on what we're doing out there so far, a little bit beforehand.
No problem. We plan on, we have a process, it's called a PSA process.
Hey, Tony, you might want to stand here so Dale can hear you.
Yeah, we have a process that's called a PSA process. It's a pressure swing absorption process. It's actually very, very simple in terms of the concept. It's activated carbon, just a whole bunch of carbon pellets, which has a really high porosity, surface area in it. And you flow the gas through it, and what happens is helium is one of the smallest molecules around. You have hydrogen and helium, then everything else just gets bigger than that. And so it actually outruns, when you're flowing through it, it outruns the other molecules, the nitrogen and other molecules that are in there. And it goes on through, and you actually capture it through that process. So you've got this activated carbon that has angstroms in terms of the width of the pores in this. So it's really that simple. It's the little guy gets to outrun the big guy, as they're going through there, and you actually grab that and capture that. So we're going to install a plant, and we're going to flow this gas into it from the plant. We're going to put compression on the wells, because one of the things they were talking about, the Kerr-McGee and the whole drop off, a combination of the economics plus then the demand left, and then you throw all that in on top of, they were getting lower on their pressure, so they were probably going to have to install a whole bunch of compression also to keep running their process, and just the whole economics left the process, so they shut it down, and so it just wasn't economic anymore. Nowadays, with this PSA process, which has been developed, mainly since the 70s and perfected, let's call it perfected because it's been around for a while, but perfected, you can actually go after the lower pressure stuff. Our plants operate in about a 65, 70 pound range. So it doesn't take much compression to move the gas through them and actually be able to process and recover the helium in this. So what we're going to do is we're going to start out with 4 wells. Hopefully the first well we'll actually have online, knock on wood, I keep telling management, somewhere around May 15th. And we will have the plant installed also, and we will start. That's the 31-1 well in section 31. It's on the Navajo. It's on Navajo land. It will come in.
It's fee minerals underneath.
It's fee minerals
underneath. It's Navajo surface and fee minerals there.
So the plant, gross capacity of the plant we're going to put in to begin with is 2 million cubic feet a day. Okay, and we hope to be able to fill that plant up out of 4 wells. We think the new wells we're going to drill, the 34 here and the 3-1 that we're doing for the spacing, and then we have the 33-1 and then also the 31-1. We hope we will be able to get up to over or close to the 2 million cubic feet a day. Our models are run at 1.5 to 1.6, but we actually, some of us think, you know, there's probably going to be pretty good reservoir, like Kurt said. You know, it's really good permeability. We think they'll flow, and especially with compression, we're going to be putting the compression on the field to be able to pull the pressure on the wells down to almost 0 pounds at the wellhead. Whereas before they were having to flow and buck this pressure to flow all the way this 5 miles into the Kermit plants. So we're going to go ahead and pull the pressure down and come into the plant and extract it. So, and we'll start out that way. And we're going to be doing some, you know, the completions as we go to check the Shinnerup, because we've seen really good blows in the Shinnerup zone, and we hope to get a nice surprise out of that, and then go put 2 or 3 more plants later on. You know, so. But the process again is very simple. There's no chemical processes to it. It's a flow-through pressure type of process. You know, and we vent the nitrogen to the atmosphere and recover the helium and put it in trailers. And people, Praxair, we actually have a contract with Praxair for this particular project. They'll be coming in with their tube trailers, and we'll be filling up their tube trailers, and they'll be trucking it out. It'll be a pretty simple operation.
I have two questions. Okay, first one, so this is demonstrated technology. There are plants operating in the world that you understand the economics and the technology very well.
Yeah, we have 5 different operations with this same process running. Up at, you mentioned, I think David mentioned up at DBK, NOG up there. We've got 2 plants sitting up there using the exact same process.
Okay.
Kinder Morgan, you know, actually over in Oklahoma, we take the off gas off an NRU, run it through exactly the same plant that we'll be setting out here.
Okay.
2 million cubic feet a day. It's a proven technology.
What are you going to do with wastewater?
There is none at this point.
So you're going to stay above the water table, knock on wood.
Yeah.
Okay.
It all just keeps us clear.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, at this point, we don't anticipate anything. Looking at the logs and the production, as long as we stay and we just stop when we top into the Coconino, we won't be drilling down to where we'll have any water production. Now, that by chance, if we do, you know, at the end of the day, there's enough wells out there, we will actually end up re-injecting it back down into the Coconino, the very same zone that it comes from, if that should happen.
Okay.
You know, it's just, that's the correct thing to do anymore. You don't dump it down the creek.
Yeah.
Because like he mentioned, it's 35,000 parts per million. That's the same salinity as the ocean. You don't dump that out on the ground. You know, that's what kills things. The gas and stuff doesn't kill it, but the saltwater wells.
Doesn't EPA require a permit for reinjection?
Yeah.
If you were to do it, in state lines, yeah, you have to go through the study and show. It's the same thing. We'd come in and we would show, yeah, we're going back in the same zone. You know, it's you're running it in a circle.
Kerr-McGee had some water handling, but they had opened up, you know, a much bigger interval, and you know, that down the road could be, in some of our wells, could be an issue. We're not anticipating that at this point, but you know, knock on wood, we hope it's not something we'll need to deal with anytime soon.
But it's also a permitting process
It
that's
is.
well established.
It is, and it's
Yeah.
it's complex, and you know, there's a lot of regulatory.
Yeah, it's not easy, but it's an established path.
It is.
If
You're
I
not
remember,
pioneering.
it's more of a question. If I remember right, Arizona doesn't have the permitting process in reinjection. I think it's just strictly EPA. Is that correct?
You may want to check with the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, because if you're pumping any water out of the ground and discharging it, you're going to need a minimum an APP permit.
But I'm just strictly referring to
For
reinjection.
reinjection, not sure, but I can find out very quickly.
My recollection was on the salt domes at near Toltec, near Eloy, that they wouldn't allow the reinjection once they used the water to mine that. Even though the water that they were using to mine was less salty than where, you know, they intended to, where it was coming from.
You're gonna be using pipelines to get the gas
That was one of the
well to
problems.
plant?
Yeah, from the well to the plant, we'll be laying, the first well will have a 4-inch poly line. We'll actually be laying them on the surface, except where we bore under the roads to minimize the environmental impacts. There'll be a 4-inch coming from that well. We'll have a 6-inch lateral going west over to the 34 section. The 34, the 33, and the number 3 will come in with 3-inch laterals to that 6-inch, and that 6-inch will come into the plant from the west.
What's helium go for these days anyway?
We got quite a range depending on, and I say quite a range, anywhere from $125 to $210 an MCF.
Is
So
that still kind of controlled by the feds, or is that more open market now?
no, it's totally open market. I mean,
Private party
pretty-
transactions.
Yeah, it's
It's not a fungible commodity. There's not a ready market for it. It's not like you call a helium buyer and it's like, here we go, let's go. It's a long contractual take or pay contract kind of a scenario, and
quarter of the use is for balloons, party balloons. A quarter of it is shield gas for welding, and then you get into your scientifics. As he mentioned, where whether it be the space run, the MRI is another huge one. It's about 10% worldwide. But the market, I mean, it's really, you can just kind of picture, well, that's a pretty limited market. I mean, it's definable, type of market on it. It's not like the natural gas where you're really, consuming it and burning it and population's growing. So it's a price.
one of the reasons why there's a lot of interest around helium is the government during the space program stockpiled a great deal of helium in a place in Amarillo called Cliffside. That was helium that was coming out of the Central Kansas uplift in a series of pipelines and going into the Cliffside storage. And now, for years, it's been going the other way. They've been moving it out of storage and selling it through a series of plants, which IACX is about ready to put one on that pipeline themselves, and selling it to industrial gas companies for all these different applications. And it looks like, certainly within the next 5 years, that strategic stockpile of helium, which is about 30% of half of the world's supply or something. So about 1/6 of the world's supply on a daily basis, it'll be gone. And when that's gone, it's going to be tighter market conditions than you have now. And so
it'll be more of a true, supply and demand, kind of like the oil and gas business. People will go drill and fill it up, and the prices will go. But the prices, they're that high when you think about the price. Well, it's $200 an MCF for 150, in that range. But it's normally, as he mentioned, there's only about 1% that you would go after in most of these, or you would like to go after wells that had 1% helium in them, just from an economic standpoint. There's a lot of gas helium out there in the 0.1, 0.2, the smaller amounts, but 1%, is what we look for to try, 0.9, 1 or greater. Makes a very nice, economic project.
as you noted, those shallow wells, the primary cost is not the cost of drilling and capture. The primary cost is fractionation, and that's where we'll have the bulk of our investment is in the gear to fractionate and separate helium from nitrogen.
Any other questions before we move on? Okay, the hearing portion regarding well spacing on range 34-1 and range 3-1.
We'll go ahead with just a presentation on our drilling program at Pentadome, if that's okay with you, Frank, and move forward and tell you that, and then you can act on it. Go ahead.
Okay, Dale, we're starting on the second presentation that says 2016 drilling program, Pentadome.
Okay.
And I'll go to the title slide to the first page. So on the wells in question are the Ranger 34-1 and the Ranger 3-1. They're named after the sections that they're going to be drilled in. The 34-1 on this topographic map sits between the KM36 well, a short distance to the northeast, and the KM172 that's down near the section line with section 3. And again, those wells were drilled in the 50s. They were originally called the Macy wells, and the KM172 was the discovery well for the field. And the Ranger 3-1, there's presently no other wells in the section, and I'll shortly show the seismic justification for why we're proposing to drill in both locations. There's a third well that may come up later in the meeting. There's a shut-in well, a well that was never plugged and abandoned in section 35 that will be discussed as separately later. Okay, next slide. Whoops. Last fall, in support of drilling these wells, we conducted a seismic survey using bird seismic from Globe, Arizona. Arizona is a proud supplier of one of the better seismic contractors in the United States. A small company, but they're quite skilled in what they do. They do what's called microseismic. As we mentioned earlier, that these drilling targets are so shallow, we're only at 1,000 feet, that normal oil industry seismic would have been really cost prohibitive to do here because it's designed to image the Earth much deeper. So I knew of bird seismic, and we contracted to do this initial job. It's about 5 miles of seismic data, and we've just in the process of permitting to do about 8 more miles out here because the results are very revealing. The seismic lines are shown here. There's a line called 15P1 shot in 2015, Pinadome line 1, that goes northeast southwest through the field. None of these wells have, if you're working as a geophysicist looking at seismic data, one of the logs you like is what's called a sonic log. It tells you the rock velocities, and we don't have any of those from the field. So it was really important to have the seismic lines go through the well locations. So this line goes through the KM36 well and the KM172 well. Line 2 then is a more north-south oriented line that is pivotal for recommending the location for the Ranger 3-1, and it's tied to the 172 well. And then on the west, we shot a short line segment through here. For our first well that we drilled here was a bit of a bust at the Coconino. You'll see in the structure map here, if you can remember the first presentation, it showed Pinadome as just a very large dome here. You'll see here that we have, in actuality, after shooting the seismic, we've got like 3 little high mini domes within that, and that and when we drilled this well, we didn't know it at the time. It was before the seismic was shot. The well was about 30 feet low to our expectations, so that was obviously not desirable. So we said we can't have that happen again, and so we acquired the seismic data to illuminate the subsurface so we knew where to better place the wells. And that placement I've recommended to our team is here for the Ranger 34-1 and here for the Ranger 3-1. And I'll show you the logic for that in a minute. Again, just to talk about at the surface here, we have the Chin Lee formation that we're going to drill through.
We're on the next page, Dale.
Oh, thanks, Frank. So the Shinnerup is going to be one of our targets. It was the well is usually in the area, and this includes that 33-1 well I said was kind of a bust. The range of production is from about 150 to 300 MCF per day. The helium percentage is a little bit lower. It ranges in the 5 to 7% range for the Shinnerup, but it still, we think, could be a valuable target. And then our main target, well, the second target of these wells is the Coconino formation. So, Tony, do you have any comments on a drilling strategy?
Yeah, we're going to go down. We're going to drill down with air. We'll be drilling with air, not with water or mud. And we'll drill down to the top of the Shinnerup, which is approximately 700 feet on the very top. and then we will drill into it and do a flow test on the Shinneram to see before we have any commingling between it and the Coconino. Because we think that's a potential future reservoir also that has not been developed in the whole area. We do have, I mean, based on the past test of the 33-1 well, it does have helium in it, and it's 6.4% helium in the Shinneram in the 33-1, so it's slightly less. Most of the helium concentrated in the Coconino, and that would be, it just has a better seal on top of it. But then also the Shinneram has the Chinle seal on the top of it, and you're going to see that on the top. So after that, after we drill in it, we test that. We'll just flow test it to to the surface, dry, and then when we get the data we need from that, we might need to stimulate to make sure the porosity is open next to the wellbore. But then after that, we will just go ahead and air drill on down and touch into the top of the Coconino, and at that point stop and put the well online and start producing. We know the Coconino has really good permeability. As he mentioned, 200-300 millidarcies, which is actually fantastic.
And Kurt knows how to say stop.
And we believe, because of that seismic, that we're going to find gas that's above the areas that have already been produced, right? So we've got helium section that's higher than the highest current production. So from a geologic standpoint, it stands to reason that we have gas section that's accessible.
Yes. There's been mentioned a few times that we're just going to barely drill into the top of it. The Kerr-McGee wells in the 60s drilled all the way through, several hundred feet into the Coconino until they penetrated into the water leg. We're going to avoid that like the plague. We're going to drill just the top 6 to 10 feet of the Coconino. So
we're not trying to maximize rate as much as we're trying to maximize efficiency and really trying to stay away from water.
So the Fort Apache is something off in the future.
It's something that you have to think about, right? I mean,
yeah.
Maybe seismic will show you that.
Correct. Yep. So I think it's, we obviously gain experience with all these operations here, and then once we feel good about that, then you can maybe start looking and dreaming deeper.
With water.
Yeah. So you guys doing straight vertical drilling here so far?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Are you like too shallow to even think about doing like horizontal testing?
That's true.
Yeah.
Yep.
It would be really, really hard to do. I mean, 1,000 foot's about the limit.
Yeah.
But it's a good question from the standpoint of the Shinneram is somewhat of an unconventional resource, right? We think.
The reservoir's not.
So we're going to be thinking about, ways to deal with the unconventional nature of it, and there are deviated, where you start at the surface and go into the sideways. Where if we could open up 100 feet of section sideways, or use coiled tubing to drill, horizontally for a short leg in that, it might make those wells quite a bit more prolific.
Yeah.
Those are all things, dreams for the future at this point.
You also in 1,000-foot hole and mining at 60, 70 degree angle at the collar is not unusual at all. You might even drill it not beginning vertically, but beginning.
Well, that's what I was referring to. There's an outfit in Oklahoma that drills wells like that.
Oh,
They've
okay.
got a top drive that works at the surface sideways.
Yeah.
And those are again are dreams for the future. But we think there's a meaningful accumulation of Shinneram helium that's not produced.
And you did mention stimulation too. We're talking like fracking here, the dredging work.
I think we're talking nitrogen. Mainly to get past the wellbore is all we're talking about. We're not talking about like you're thinking hydraulic fracturing in terms of like trying to bust a rock.
Yeah, if you were doing hydraulic fracturing, then you would be probably involved in
Nitrogen stimulation.
Okay, so Dale, we'll go on to the next slide. So there'll be a summary panel of the Pinadome or Ranger 34-1. So next slide. Oops, press it too hard. So just a well plat showing the existing wells that have been drilled, that are mainly plugged and abandoned here. Not ours. This well was drilled in fall of 2014. But the Ranger 34-1 here with the offset wells here that are shown. Keep those in mind. KM 36 and KM 172. They'll appear on the seismic section. And then so we'll go from the well plat to the structural plat, as it's called. This map is based on the seismic data, and what it shows of probably most importance is that you can get considerably high on the order from the KM 36 well. You can get about 30 feet high to that well, and from the KM 172, it's drilled in a hole, and there's a sort of synclinal depression going that segregates Pin-a-Dome into really two domes. So in contrast to what Kerr-McGee understood it to be, where they had this as all one big dome here, there's a swale between, or a trough that segregates the dome into a north dome here, where we want to drill the 34-1, and in a south dome here where we're going to want to drill the 3-1. So the rationale for drilling the two wells is that we're going to be testing these two domes, and that we can get up dip from the KM 172 about over 50 feet, probably on the order of 60 feet up structure. That's very high, and this well, this well was still producing gas when it was at low amounts when it was shut in, and as was this well. So as David was saying, we think we have a good probability of success of encountering gas by going higher up structure. So next slide is the land plat that Dale, you reviewed with Rick earlier. In yellow is showing our present lease position. In blue is unleased.
And a portion of that, Dale, is that we have under option. As you can see, we mark it down as an option until we negotiated with the Hortenstein group. So otherwise, it's straight leasehold that we own in there.
Incidentally, that D-Nation is not me.
No, that is not you, Dad. It's not too common to have it like that, but that is not you. I think it's Dorothy Nation is what it is, out of Amarillo, who RMC is.
And presumably some long lost cousin.
Okay, so next slide is just shows a topographic map showing the location of the well with the existing wells that were drilled, and the survey plat, and then the coordinates of the well. Do you have any comments, Rick?
That's just part of the application process for the exception location. We provide that.
So the next slide is I spoke about this briefly, but I've zoomed in on the structural map here. The seismic lines are shown in blue with the red dots. Each of those is what we call a source point or station. We had the small truck that we used as our energy source impacted the ground every 24 feet, and we had a sensor every 24 feet. So these, I think these are about every 240 feet separating these points here. This just reiterates the point I made earlier, is that we believe that we can, from the KM 36 well, we can get about 30 feet up structure from that well, and then we can get about 50 feet up structure from the KM 172. And I should add that this, I mentioned earlier in the meeting that I thought this would be an ideal place to drill originally because it was between these two wells, and I just wanted to stay away. I knew this was low from as compared to this well here, but the seismic is shown as not only is it, I thought it would be about flat, but it shows that it's significantly higher than what we would have expected. Okay, I keep talking about the seismic, so here's what it looks like. So the surface of the Earth, or I'm kind of down in the Earth a little bit here, but this is time on the left axis, and each of these ticks, I have to remind myself what they are here. Yeah, each of these ticks is a hundredth of a second. So that's and here at well, let's see, yeah, let's see, 140. Yeah, so we're at about 0.2 of a second right here. So what happens is the energy source is that our little truck has what they call an air hammer. It pops the ground, the energy travels, and then it bounces off different rock layers. And in our case, to go down to the coconino, which is shown here in yellow, it takes about 0.2 of a second to travel down there and back. So it's the rocks are at pretty high transmission velocities. Okay, so what's it show us? So I've, and you can do this as well as I can. I mean, you can see that here's the KM36 projected onto the line, our proposed location here, and the KM172, and then this other well at the end, the KM349. Well, here, this is the Shinnerup level here. So this little line, I've labeled some of them here, Shinnerup, Bowenkopi, Coconino, and the yellow line is the Coconino. Particularly at the Shinnerup level, you can see that the KM172 is drilled in the hole in this saddle here, and that you can climb up structure as you go to the right and get higher in the earth. It's very clear at the Shinnerup. Here at the Coconino, you can see a similar trend that we're getting up structure in this direction. Similarly, if you go to the KM36 well, where it ties the Shinnerup here, you can see that you can climb up in this direction here, as you can at the Coconino level, and kind of ignore these little jittery things. That's just part of the data processing. But anyway, from both the horizons we're interested in, the data show you can get considerably higher from both wells at this drilling location, between the KM172 and the KM36. So the seismic was the justification for posting the well where it is.
And that, it looks to me like there's a fault just to the left of 34.1. That doesn't bother you at all?
This is, I think, no, I don't. I think this is more of a data processing artifact.
Okay.
So.
Fair enough.
Yep. No, I mean, because you'll see some other ones here, things like that there. But that is true. That's not an unreasonable question because, and I certainly considered that before I posted the location. Okay, so Dale, we've gone on to the Ranger 3-1 set of slides, and I'll go past the title page to the land plat. It's a similar land plat to what was shown before, only we moved a section to the south. It shows that there's some additional wells in 9 and 10 that were drilled, but still pretty far removed. In terms of the seismic, it turns out I was able to find a sonic log from the 178, which was useful in the seismic interpretation. Oops. Moving on to the structure plat. Just reiterates that the Pinadome 3-1 is drilled on a structural high in the northwest quarter of section 3. Again, reiterating the point that the Pinadome is now has two domes, really, not a single structural dome. Next slide is the land plat, which shows we have leases in the 9 section area. And then the next slide is the showing the topographic setting of the well and the surveyed coordinates. And then the next slide is a focused in looking at the structural map made from the seismic. I should have mentioned that these red dots are what we call the datums. This is where I picked the seismic and converted it to a depth point. And it's showing that we have a structural high here at this location. And again, that, just like the Ranger 34-1, it looks like we can get up to 50 feet high from the KM172 well. And again, that was the second most productive well for helium in Arizona. here's the seismic, I'm on the seismic page now, Dale.
Okay.
So we're looking at line 2, the north-south oriented line. So north is to the right, south is to the left. The KM172 well is shown here. The intersection point with line 1 is shown right at the well. Again, the data shows at the Shinnerup level here that you're in a structural low at the 172, and that you can climb out of that low as you go to the south, and then it seems to drop off a little bit again. And that's mimicked at what you see at the Coconino level, that you're in a structural low and that you can climb as you go a short distance to the south. So as in the other case, then we believe that, you know, this is to test in section 3, we think this is the ideal place to test the Coconino. And I think that's the conclusion of the seismic.
Kurt, is it worth mentioning perhaps to Bill's question about some of the noise and the seismic data, the issue you have with the railroad and the freeway being nearby? Does that play a factor?
Well, okay, so in terms of acquisition here, I mentioned the oil industry, they do it much differently. They'd have 4 62,000-pound vibrator trucks. We have a little air hammer in the back of a 1-ton truck. Which is good because we have a low environmental footprint and we can do things. But because our pop is kind of small, and these instruments are extremely sensitive, if I were to just take a step like this outside the trailer, and let's say I'm 20 feet from a geophone, it will easily record that. We can't record when it rains, or I had one project where snow melting off sagebrush, the individual water drops were shutting us down. So the sensitivity of what we call the geophones is extreme. We're about a mile from the Burlington Northern right-of-way, and there's about 8 to 10 trains an hour. It's unbelievable sometimes. And we see those, we're shut down for probably about 5 minutes because the effects of those phones, you'll just see on there's like a little oscilloscope, and you'll see all the geophones, and you'll see the train coming. Pretty soon it just obliterates everything we do. So, but in terms of the data quality, that's not that issue. We've taken measures when we acquired the data to remove that effect. So basically, he shuts down the crew. They do other activities while the train comes by, and then when it leaves, then we start recording again. So it really only affects the efficiency of our operation. Okay. It doesn't, and it could affect potentially the data quality, but it's kind of minimized by waiting.
It's probably 10 to 20 minutes an hour is what you're shooting.
Yeah, and it seems to vary too.
Yeah.
There's also a coal train that goes on a spur.
St. John's, spur to St.
Yeah,
John's.
St. John's. So that comes 4 times a day. Become very acutely aware of the railroad traffic there. So.
Were you paying your seismic crew by the hour there?
Yeah, no. They're paid by, they're contracted by the mile. But it always becomes they're obviously trying to do production, but they're a good, diligent crew. They understand and they're appreciative of the work. So.
And they're out of where?
Globe.
Globe of all places, huh?
Yeah, Ken Bernstein. In the small world, I met him in 1982, and I haven't seen him since. And it's called Bird Seismic because his nickname was Big Bird.
Oh, okay.
He looked like Big Bird.
And they'll be mobilizing again in another 2
The
weeks.
18th.
The 18th of
Assuming we get our
April.
permit.
We've got a permit moving through. Right there, right here.
10 today.
So
Good to go. Have you actually applied for the 34 well yet? I don't think you have there with the state. Or like that. Or did we do that so long ago I've forgotten about it?
I think everything's been permit and everything's through, hopefully.
Permit's been submitted,
Yeah, submitted.
but it's subject to this because of these.
Did you get one?
Yeah, I've got both these
Okay.
applications.
The applications are there.
How many people will you be employing up there?
Sorry,
Really, not that many. I mean,
it's not a big source.
Yeah, the drilling of the well, probably 20. And while they're drilling, they're pretty fast also. They're drilled. The plant itself is, during the construction, we will move in and totally plumb it up and have it online in 2 weeks.
Jesus.
You know, there's skid mounted, there's 5, vessels. It's a very simple operation. The operation of it, there will be one person with a relief pumper that runs the whole plant in the field. And then we'll contract people, as needed. It should, maintenance and things like that. People will come out of other places.
Dirt work,
Whether it be
we
Farmington. Pardon?
dirt work and stuff like that. We got some general people working on doing some of that kind of stuff.
Can you give out what the estimated capital cost on that plant would be?
Sure. And it's 1.1 million.
Okay.
Is the plant itself.
Okay. How many wells do you need for that plant to function, do you think?
Well, we're planning on drilling the 4.
4.
We've got the 33,
Yeah.
the 31, and then these 2 wells. And I'm hoping that we can get enough gas out of those 4 to get us up to 1.6, maybe even higher. And like I said, the capacity of the plant we're installing is at 2 million max capacity, cubic feet a day. And if we need another one, we've got several more that we'll be talking to y'all about afterwards.
Okay.
We hope all this turns out real successful and we get to, within 6 to 8 months, get to move towards the second plant. High expectations on that.
That well that's unplugged, that's never been shut, where is that in relationship to?
Straight east.
Straight east in section 35.
You want to
Actually go back. There.
That's at Holbrook Energy?
Holbrook Energy.
Yeah, okay. And that had helium in it, or any significant helium in it? Holbrook Energy?
On the structure map, you can see it's drilled in a low.
I know, but I was asking.
Yeah, we have a little presentation on that when the group is ready. We can show you what they
Okay.
found. But it wasn't a commercial well.
Okay.
Is that something we're talking about today or no, not today?
We're going in the general discussion, we're going to ask for some from the floor to talk about it. We're complete with our presentation, Frank. As to
At this point, since this is the hearing portion, is it appropriate to ask for comments from the public?
The rules say we need to see if there are any objections.
Yes, I would ask for if there's any objection.
Any objections to this project? To the changing of the spacing? No objections noted. Do we have any motion on accepting the change in spacing, the exceptions?
Yeah, here's Dale. I'd like to move that we grant the spacing exceptions for the Ranger 34-1 and Ranger 3-1 wells as by application.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? The ayes have it. The exception is approved.
we appreciate it very much.
Let's move on. Any other questions before we move on? The report by the state geologist.
I'm here, Mr. Chairman. I got a couple of, but just for the record, this is Lee Allison. I'm calling in from our offices in Tucson. Wait a second, there's something just... Okay, sorry, there was something that came up on my computer in the background there. Two things I want to report. Senate Bill 1059, the continuation of the Oil and Gas Commission, was signed into law by Governor Ducey this past week. And it extends the life of the commission for 6 years. That was a change from the bill as it was introduced and recommended by the Sunset Review Committee, which had proposed the maximum length that's currently being used of 8 years. And the rationale, our understanding is that with the proposed transfer of the Geologic Survey from state government to the University of Arizona, the duties for supporting the commission are proposed to transfer to the Department of Environmental Quality, and that their sunset review will be coming up in 6 years. So the rationale is reportedly to have both DEQ and the commission's sunset come together at the same time. Personally, I'm not sure I understand the need for that, because in the 20 plus years or so that we've been supporting the commission, our sunset reviews were out of sync, and nobody seemed to see a problem with that. But anyway, it's approved. The commission will continue for another 6 years before your next sunset review. The second item, in terms of the survey being transferred to the University of Arizona, that's being included in a budget bill. Those are in discussion and negotiation right now at the Capitol. There are some details being worked out, but none of it, from what we can see, from what we've heard so far, is changing the plan to move support for the commission from the survey to DEQ. So the issues that are being debated are really the funding issues on our appropriation and things built around that. When we hear more, we'll share it with you. But the budget bills are anticipated to come out publicly next week, and if there's any changes, we may not see them until they're actually publicly released. So I think those are the key things. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Dale, Frank Thorwald, where are we in the process in moving to DEQ?
I don't know the answer to that.
Lee, do you have any update on that?
We have briefed DEQ's folks about what are the costs, what are the duties, what are the assets that we're maintaining. So we provided that early on, probably over 2 months ago, and haven't heard back from them. In the last few days, we've heard from the Joint Legislative Budget Committee staff. That's the budget staff that works for the legislature for both the House and the Senate. And they had a number of questions about just the duties, the number of wells permitted each year, how many wells were reporting production, permit fees collected. So Niall and myself, I think, have answered all of their questions up to this point. So we understood that to be their analysis of the governor's budget proposal that would move support for the commission from the survey to DEQ. So I think they were asking questions to make sure they understood what the financial implications were, what the staffing needs would be, and that they'll be analyzing that as part of their evaluation of the governor's budget proposal. So that implies to us that it's on the table, but we haven't heard anything more as to where it stands within the budget bill.
Lee, are they going to have, Frank Thorwald again, Lee, are they going to have enough, the proper staff needed for the commission to perform its duties properly? Or are they going to have to contract some of that out to you folks?
You know, that's one of the questions we've developed internally here, whether they would turn to us for some technical support, but also the question of the well files and all the well cuttings and cores. We would anticipate that if they're going to be legally responsible, they would want to take possession of the paper well files, the well logs, the well files. But we also maintain the cuttings from all of the wells, and that's a room full of cabinets and storage units in the basement here. And it's something that I don't think DEQ has ever done before. I'm not familiar with anybody on the DEQ staff with expertise in oil and gas exploration and production, although they have raised the question in the past about permitting, or raised the issue, I guess, about permitting wells in the Kerr-McGee CO2 field at St. John's, about the possibility of enhanced recovery, hydraulic fracturing, and they said they had a role in permitting hydraulic fracturing. But again, I think they're coming at it from the water aquifer protection side of things. So at this point, I don't know that they have anybody on staff with oil and gas expertise. They have not raised the possibility to us of us continuing to provide any of those services, and we haven't had a conversation yet about whether they want to take, they expect to take the files, and how they're going to handle the cuttings. So we've sent them inventories of what materials we have, the volumes of it, the nature of it, after the initial inquiry back in January, and we have not had any further conversation with them.
Is the governor's office aware of all of the different things that are going to have to be transferred over to DEQ, like the core cuttings and all the other files and so forth?
They should be. We briefed them on that. We prepared briefing materials, and we raised that early on, along with all the other issues related to our move. So from what we've seen, they focus primarily on the appropriations issue between the state and the university, and that seems to be where most of the discussion and the debate has been going on. So we've come back to them and raised some of these issues again, just as a reminder. But I think with all of the other issues going on in the budget, and we understand there's other consolidations on the table as well, we haven't had any response yet back in terms of either telling us what they expect or propose, or asking further questions. So I'm anticipating that once they get the basic budget bill out there, then legislators may be coming back. We've had some calls or talks with legislators and staffers from the caucus and from JLBC wanting more details on the elements of this, but they haven't gotten back to us. So I think it's all just going into the hopper as they try to negotiate the budget bills right now.
I was just thinking about the continuity and the ability of us to meet our responsibilities as we move forward. And what do you believe the time frame is going to be on this?
We've been told by some legislators in leadership positions that they want to get the budget wrapped up by April 19th is a target date, but they are running about a month behind this year from where they were a year ago. And we understand there's a number of other complexities they're still dealing with. One of the issues that has not been brought forward to us anyway is, will we stay in our building even on a temporary basis? The University of Arizona indicated early on they do not have space on campus right now where they could just move us intact. There are scattered small spaces around campus, and nobody feels that that's appropriate. So the possibility of the university negotiating an arrangement with the state for us to stay temporarily in our quarters was raised early on, but we haven't heard. We're now coming up where the time frame, if we are supposed to be moving, we need to be planning for that right now, and it's not happening. So if this budget bill passes and the transfer is approved, and we are told to move, there's going to be a real scramble to try to get this done. And that would raise the question of, are the cuttings being moved? Would they stay here as a state facility, or would we transfer them to DEQ? And again, none of this has been, nobody's responded back to us, either from the governor's office or from U of A, on these details. So everything I've seen indicates that they've been really focusing on the base appropriations, and it's only after they get that resolved, or do we anticipate they're going to get back to these other questions.
Is there any legal?
Lee, I'd like.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Lee, obviously the library would be a concern. Has that been discussed with the university people, where that would, if they would accept that, and how it would be made available to the public?
Dale, we, in the week after the governor's budget came out, we prepared a 45-page briefing book for the university, and we laid out every asset, every issue, a complete inventory of all of our resources, described our responsibilities, and then since then we've had multiple face-to-face meetings, phone calls, and email exchanges going through the details. So we think we've done a comprehensive job of raising every issue that we could come up with them. They've come back and early on asked some additional questions, and we've followed up with that material. So we've done that both for the main office here in Tucson and in Phoenix. And then, like I mentioned a couple weeks ago, we followed up again, both with the governor's office and with the university, with a short list of some of the key issues that need to be dealt with in terms of, where are we going to be located, and what asset the legislation will actually have to transfer ownership of the assets from the state to the university. We cannot just pick stuff up and take it out of the state system and move it. We actually have to have legislative authority to do that. So I think we've done a comprehensive job, but again, we have not had any response from either the state or the university in terms of what their plans are for any of this.
The whole thing defies logic.
Lee, Frank.
Well, both. Yeah, go ahead, Frank.
A quick question. Just like the issues with regard to the legal questions of the commission has to stay within a governmental entity. Do any of these files or the library or the cuttings, is there any kind of legal requirement that they stay within? In other words, can they be kept separately from outside of a government entity?
No, there's this is Rick Zeiss. Privatization, finding an institute or something to take. I haven't done research on it. Certainly I can. My guess is no, it's going to, because the access to the public remains important. Turning over to private hands may limit accessibility, and we probably should look into that. Lee, this is Rick Zeiss. I have a quick question for you. Yeah. How much room or these cuttings and these paper materials, where are they currently stored, and how large of a storage area is it? And the reason I bring this up is ADEQ is going through a contraction right now and reducing its footprint in its own building. And my concern is if ADEQ hasn't taken into consideration that now they're going to have a new storage area, that there's not going to be room set aside to do this.
Yeah, and early on when they followed up after the governor's budget bill came out, contacted us and asked, okay, what does this involve? We provided materials. So the well files themselves are not very large. It's the equivalent of probably 3 6-foot, 8-foot tall bookcases and 2 to 3 file cabinets. And we're holding those in one office, one locked office here in the survey, and the well files that are currently active that have not been publicly released, that's just one locked file cabinet. That's really very small, and a pickup truck could probably pack up all of those boxes and move them. The cuttings, though, are much more extensive, and we have a fairly large room in our basement with the cuttings. And those will take up, I don't have in front of me the square footage, but they are fairly extensive. They're bulky, and also moving them will be a real challenge. These are in very large, mostly wooden cabinets. You'd have to pull drawer by drawer out. You wouldn't be able to move the entire thing, so it'd be important to make sure the samples are well protected. Those are the ones in the glass vials. Then we have other shelving units with the cuttings that are in boxes, cardboard boxes, which are more typical of most modern well settings from my experience. So there's, and again, I can't give you a volume, but it's a decent sized room. I'm trying to think, we're talking a few 500 square feet or something, probably.
Okay.
Off the top of my head, it might be a little larger than that, of cuttings in these cabinets and steel shelving units. And then core, we don't have that much core because in part we've generally never had the storage space for it. But core, I don't believe is required. Core is mostly voluntary. So you could argue that we maintain a core repository. And I know in other states, state geologic surveys serve that role for oil and gas conservation agencies, and they've delegated that authority. And I believe Michigan is one of those, where the Michigan Oil and Gas an entity used to be part of the survey, and they split them off. And I believe the survey now at Western Michigan University maintains a core repository and stores all the core. I don't know if they do the same thing for the cuttings. So at this point, I think we could maintain the core just like we do right now, because it's mixed in with our mineral core and other types of core, and it's a relatively small space. Depending on where we end up and what space we have, we could maintain the cuttings on behalf of DEQ, in part because we have the technical expertise to do that. We've done it for a long time. We're maintaining core. So for us to do the cuttings as well would not be out of line if we have the resources and the physical space to maintain that.
Thank you.
Any other questions before we move on? Lee, thank you for the presentation. As always, you do a fantastic job.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that. We'll try to keep you abreast of developments, but like I said, we've really been in the dark for the past couple months while they've mostly focused on the base budget, our appropriation. I'm hoping very quickly here we'll be able to get to these more operational issues and have a better idea what's going to happen, and we'll let you know as soon as we know something. So thank you.
Thank you. Moving on, the report of the Oil and Gas Administrator.
This is Niall. This last week I approved 5 applications for a permit to drill from Blackstone Exploration. 2 of those are on fee land and 3 are on state land department leases. The wells are generally targeting the Holbrook Basin, but quite a ways to the east of the area we've been hearing about this morning. They're looking at properties down in 16 north, 14 north, kind of spread across 16 to range 16 to 20 east. Obviously, I received the permit to drill applications from Ranger that we've been discussing this morning during the presentations. And then received communication recently from another company, Holbrook Basin Partners, who told me they're preparing and plan to soon submit additional permit to drill applications. I got some correspondence from Carmen Bonanno about Blackstone's drilling crews will soon be returning from their break. They're going to move on to the Rocking Chair Ranch number 3. They plan to start drilling that, to spud that early next week. Mr. Bonanno also reported that he's purchasing a completion rig and plans to begin the completion on the Rocking Chair Ranch next week. I don't think it'd be surprising to anybody, but it's probably still noteworthy that I'm receiving a large number of inquiries relating to helium, about the time to acquire permits for drilling, leasing issues, which I've been passing some of those over to you, Joe. So Other, oil and gas aren't too exciting, but a lot of people are getting excited about helium. And then one thing I want to share, we did receive the workover and MIT report from Plains Midstream for the Bumstead No. 3 storage cavern out at the Luke Salt Dome. It's worth noting that the cavern test was excellent. That's a very good reservoir. I've shared copies of that report with Frank and Dale already. If you other commissioners would like me to send that along, I'll be glad to. If you don't want it, it's 139 pages. If you don't want to look at it, I can understand that. But Bill, would you like to see a copy?
Sure, why not?
Steve? Yeah. All right, so I will send both those along.
A note, I went out to the facilities and took a tour. It was interesting what they have out there and how they're doing it.
Anyways, that's all I've got.
How are we handling that well that's not abandoned up there with regard to it being capped and so forth?
Maybe we should see or have a little discussion from the Ranger folks, or if they want to share that last presentation, I'd be glad to get it on the computer.
Okay.
Rick, would you like that?
I have one. I printed from Hunter.
We will make this short, but we just wanted to kind of brief you, and we know that there can't be any action taken or anything else. Frank, you're open for me to talk, right?
Yes.
Okay. The Holbrook Energy well is section 35, offsetting our location in the offset section. And we control the leasehold position in section 35. We've got options on part of that. Holbrook Energy does not have a leasehold underneath it that we know of, and there is a existing well bore that has not been plugged. And we do have some interest in that well bore, and Kurt will talk to that a little bit as to what we'd like to do. And we know that you're going to have to do some investigation with the Attorney General's office and things like that, how to handle the bond situation and things like that. So we just want to brief you of some thoughts with it.
So we have just a few slides in this. Does Dale have this, or no? Probably not.
I sent it to him.
Oh, he
No,
does?
they
Okay.
were emailed to
I
us.
sent them to all the commissioners. Dale,
Yep.
Dale, do you have that one with you?
Mr. Fella.
Briefing? I thought it was Lee that hung up.
Maybe we don't have anybody there. I can read, yeah. Want me to redial it? See if we...
Please enter your access code followed by the pound or hash sign. You enter. To enable audio controls, please enter your audio PIN.
Hi, this is Niall. Is anybody else online?
Oh,
Hey,
Niall, there you are.
I'm here.
We thought
Dale
Lee
here.
had hung up on us. We didn't realize we got disconnected. If you guys get a long dead spot like that, you should probably give us a call on my cell. Sorry.
I did just try. I got your voicemail.
We've moved on, and we're now talking about the well that was uncapped, and we just had started to talk about that and realized you weren't on the line, so you're at the beginning.
Okay. Okay, good. Welcome back.
Okay, Kurt's got the floor right now. I'm going to talk about the section
Okay,
35 well.
Let's just say, we just also, maybe I didn't answer the call, Kendra, because we just switched and brought up the third presentation.
Oh, okay.
So if you guys have got copies of that handy, you want to take a look at those.
it's called the Holbrook Energy 35-1 permit 919 is the title slide. Let us know when you're ready.
I'm ready. I have it available for me.
I'm ready too.
Okay. Okay, so Rick, do you have any comments for them since they...
Just that we wanted to brief the commission today with regard to that well. We know that there can be no action really taken, and we just want to start discussing this with the commission, with Niall, and how can we potentially take over that well at some point in time. So,
because we have the least present.
Yeah, we have the least position underneath it.
So moving to the next page. Whoops. So the well in question is located, the Holbrook Energy 919 wells located in section 35. And on the structure map, based on our knowledge today on the using the wellbore control and the surface geology, that well was drilled in a structural low, and it's on what we would be the very eastern flank of the Pinadome structure. The on the lower right of the structural map, you'll see a large fault map. You'll see the D and U sign symbols for the down thrown side and the up thrown side. That's the Navajo Springs fault. That's a very prominent fault that's visible at the surface, and so it has a profound topographic effect. It just brings the question why they drilled that well where they did. It was known to be in a structurally low position at the time. Perhaps they thought there was some influence from the fault that was favorable. The only other thing of interest on this slide would be since it was brought up earlier, is that later this month we hope to begin shooting about 8 more miles of additional seismic, and we'll have a line that goes across what we call this Mustang Dome feature down in sections 2 and 35. It'll go then through sections 34 and end in 33, and then we're going to extend some other lines that we shot previously, and also have a north-south line that goes through the Mustang Dome area. Okay, so on to the 919 well, and the upper left corner, so I've gone to the next page, Dale, is a photograph that I took of where the well sits. It's actually a little hard to find. It's just in the middle of a bunch of sagebrush, and it's been left with a lock and cable on it, but there's been no signs of any activity around it. They did do, I was asked earlier in the presentation if the well had found any helium. The well is considered wet on the basis of the couple things. One is the geophysical logs to the right of the photograph. You'll see the resistivity and SP log. That shows that this Coconino Sandstone Reservoir has very high water saturations because it's low resistivity. But there is, on the sonic log and below the photograph, you'll see a gas effect in the sonic log itself. It's what they call crossover, so there has been some attenuation of the log signal, so you're getting the crossover effect. So the main conclusion is that the well is a wet, non-commercial well, but there may be some gas in the water itself. In addition, when they drilled this well, the fluid level in the well bore is now at 783 feet. So when they tag the waters come up into the well bore. The well was cased to 950 feet, and as we have just mentioned, that the well was never plugged. Whoops. We did have a petrophysical analysis, gone to the next page, done by Lee Utley in Houston, Texas. He's done other petrophysical works for us. He's reiterated the conclusion that the well is wet. On the right side, you'll see a blue shaded graph there. He's shown that it's mainly wet. That's mainly based on the resistivity logs. He's stated that the water saturation is greater than 50%. He thinks it's more than 90%. That means 90% of the pore space is water in that well. He had to make some assumptions regarding the total dissolved solids. He did leave with a final thing. He said the log analysts aren't really certain what helium does in terms of effects. We do know that it does have that gas effect, but anyway, I think the overall conclusion is that the well was a commercial failure. So what our interest in the well is, two things. One, we could calibrate our geophysical interpretation by re-entering the well and putting down do what's called a velocity survey. We just measure the time it took if we discharge have a source at the surface and a geophone in the bottom of the well. We can measure the travel time. It'll calibrate us how long it takes to get to the Coconino. And that's like a couple hour morning project, so to speak. The second is that we would probably go in and see what the Coconino does in terms of its performance, just to gain better understanding of the whole field properties of Pinedome. It'll probably confirm it's wet, and then we would like to test the Shinnerup conglomerate in the well, the Shinnerup zone, which is behind pipe. So those are the two main recommendations. Rick?
That's our recommendations, and we know that you guys are going to have to look and see what needs to be done. We're willing to take over the wellbore and underneath our bond and be responsible to plug and abandon the well after we've done our activity on it. So you've currently got an operator in there that has a bond on it and has not plugged it, and it's on leasehold that we control.
When was the hole drilled?
I think it was 2004.
2004. And they were not required to plug or...
We're not going to answer that.
Bill, I reviewed the well. I reviewed the well folder a while back. I can tell you that there were a number of times where Steve Rousey, my predecessor, was prodding them to do so, but they didn't obviously act on that.
Okay.
Dale, do you have any institutional?
Sometimes. Oh.
Dale, I was asking you what you knew about it. That was all.
Yeah. Well, sometimes those things take years to get resolved, but that's no good excuse, though. In this case, maybe it was favorable to not have it plugged.
Yeah, we do have a wellbore that we can do something. We can do something with it. But.
You know, the good news is, we hold some bond money on it, but there aren't a lot of teeth in the rules to force people to take action. At least not as I read the rules. So it's just
they're vague. This is Rick Zeiss. They're vaguely written, but certainly we could take some steps. But we probably should sit down and talk about it and some options, especially in light of the fact we have a volunteer company ready to come in, use it for some data, and then plug it. I don't want that to leave because we have an issue with the bond. That's a nice volunteer to have available. So subject to further discussion and some research would be probably the best position to take right now.
Could we do that for the future?
I think we should plan on that.
Yes.
But do you want? When can we plan that? Our next meeting? Is that too soon?
I would think that maybe staff would come to us. Personally, I'd like to do it before they change their mind.
Yes.
We might change them.
How long do you think it take us to come up with some options?
Couple weeks.
Should we set a meeting for some time after that?
Let's do that.
Next regular meeting?
Yeah, that'd be a long ways out.
July.
We want to do it before then.
You want to do a special meeting in May sometime?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would say one thing just additional to that.
Mm-hmm.
Our plan right now, and we've talked to Niall about it, we've got additional locations that we're going to bring forward to the commission that we would like to get sooner than later again. So we might be able to have some additional locations brought to you with permit applications, and we're trying to process it because we know there's activity going on within the Oil and Gas Commission and who's going to be administering and things like that, and we can probably have some additional applications come forward at the same time, potentially.
So you guys would need to research what Arizona law is in terms of who owns the wellbore and the ability to hand it over or do something like that?
I think the real issue is who owns the wellbore, who holds the lease, who holds the underlying bond money now. If there's still a viable company that's going to come forward and make claim on it, can we make claim on them to come forward and plug it rather than you? But again, you're a volunteer coming forward. I don't want you to leave and have this company say, "Oh, never mind." If I've got, two birds are better than one.
Right.
And so the question is if we can make contact with the previous company and see what their thoughts are, and then move from there.
Plug-in bonds are a double-edged sword. You set them up to give you comfort. You're going to have money, but on the other hand, it kind of implies they can dump the responsibility back on the state and walk. But I don't think it's really the intention. People are supposed to comply with what they're supposed to do under the laws, and it's there as your last extreme backup in case somebody actually goes bankrupt or something and disappears. It's not necessarily a normal concept to use them on that, but we're here to
one of the
take it over and
concerns is we have a bond sitting out there, and let's assume you voluntarily come in and you plug it. What do we do with the bond money? Return it to the previous company? And that's one of the secondary issues coming up now is we have to account for that money one way or another. And quite honestly, if a company has been prodded to not do something, and you as a volunteer come forward, I somewhat am reluctant to reward someone for not doing what they should have done. And that's what we have to look into.
Yeah, the appliances.
Now, when you mentioned earlier that the Holbrook Energy Partners, is that a different party than?
Yeah, that's
totally different.
Totally different party.
Yeah, right.
Holbrook, is that Gordon?
Yeah, that's Gordon.
Yeah.
Is that who?
Gordon LeBlanc.
Okay.
Niall, have they put forth any request for permission to do this testing?
I think they just did.
Right, I meant formally though.
This is all we've done with it.
They've just had discussions with me. I've received no permit applications.
But we would, if that's something you're holding up, if you need us to make an application to tell you that we would actually do this, we would take on this responsibility, we would.
Or an interim step, if you would have to evaluate if you could allow us to go in and run our tests we want to on that, and it would not mess up anything else you would be having to do with regard to your bond. That's another potential step there. We would like to go out, and get in the well and test and run our test and check the generate, also. But we understand too, until y'all kind of work through the legalities of whether you have to formally notify you're out of here, I'm in, and this and that. We understand that too.
We'd like to get that accomplished as quickly as possible. My guess is going to happen is Niall and I are going to have a meeting next week to discuss the current status, the history of who has access and ownership of the well and the well rights, and then from there a little research and make a step of recommendation. And I hate to make a recommendation one way or another without having more background right now.
That's very nice. Thanks,
Sure.
Actually, I'm sitting there kind of astounded there's only one unplugged well out there in the field. Sure that's the only one?
Well, it's the
only one sticking up. Only one sticking up above the sagebrush.
Well, I think historically the same issue happened with Eastern Petroleum, is that it took the state a while to get them to comply with plugging the wells, and that all the wells they contracted a contractor systematically went out and did a number of wells at once. I think Kerr-McGee was a good operator and plugged theirs, but the ones at Navajo Springs were another story.
If I may inquire, Rich, the well 35.1, who owns the underlying fee property? Is it private land, state land?
It's private.
Okay.
We have Hortenstein, and we have an option to lease Hortenstein, and we've got the other leasehold underneath it leased.
Okay. So that removes state lands from the
And that would
issue.
be, the leasehold shows on the plat for our exception spacing for section 35.
Okay.
And we could exercise that option.
Yeah, we can
on a moment's
exercise
notice.
it on a moment's notice.
Well, if you'll give us some time, I think we have a little work to do.
And I'm available now anytime.
Okay.
Yeah, we appreciate your offering to come forward with an application if that's where we need to drive this, but we'll take a look.
I would think that the previous party would would like their mod money released, and could they just sign a release that says, we'll let you guys take it over, or no?
We have to do a little research first on this.
Yeah, they got other wells in the state too. Might be under that same bond.
We'll need to make sure.
Yes, definitely.
If we're going to have a special meeting in May, what works for everybody? The Friday in May, or some other Friday, or do we want to just wait and make a decision on that later?
My suggestion is you do it before Memorial Day weekend.
Good point.
Is Friday the best for everybody, or would maybe a Thursday, a different day of the week work for people, or is Friday as good as any?
I like Friday.
I think,
I like it on Friday.
yeah,
I have all week to
Dale-
get ready.
Okay, that's fine.
Is it not
It's
good
just a
for you? Or?
question. Yeah, it's not insurmountable. It just is. I got a little complication on Fridays, but I'm one of several, and I can work around, my complication.
This is Dale. I would be happy with the change to a Thursday. If this is in the next month, Thursday would be better than Friday for me. But I'm not sure I can be there anyway. We may have to do the same thing with the telephone.
Let's just keep it on Friday. That works for most people. How about that?
How does the 20th
Yeah.
look?
I think that'll work.
Shall we plan on it for the 20th then of May?
Let me look at my calendar, please. It's clear for me.
Everybody here too. We'll plan for the 20th then, for the special meeting.
We will work with you as to who needs to be here from our, if we need to be here and not be here. Or
We'll let you know.
whatever. I'm not going to be available, but Kurt
Okay.
or David, or you might see Tom Wallace or somebody, you might see Tony, anybody. And that's one of the things that's nice, is to have been able to bring multiple people from our group here today and feel comfortable coming forward, any one of us, to discuss this.
The 20th, I've got a meeting, but I can walk out of it. I think I can appear telephonically.
Okay.
Would that be 10 o'clock also?
10 a.m. good for everybody, or 10 a.m.
Okay.
Shall we move on to the next? Any other discussion before we move on? Okay. Discussion of the 2016 AZOGCC meeting, annual business meeting in Denver. Dale, are you going to go to that?
No, I wouldn't be going to it.
Do you think we should have somebody there?
I think we should. Now, the state has declined to pay expenses to do that for years, and I imagine it's still going to be the same.
I would imagine so.
Lee keeps keeps paying our dues, a minimal amount, which is okay with the AZOGCC, but I assume he can continue to do that. But going to the meetings, I had to quit doing it after I retired from the university because I didn't have any more research travel money to go. So I'm not planning. And I rarely went to the business meetings either. I tried to just catch one or two of those meetings a year, the annual meeting and the mid-year meeting. But Frank, if you or any of the others could go, it would be a good thing. It's a good organization. Incidentally, I was just sent a plaque. I've been the longest running official representative, 37 years.
Congratulations.
Yeah. That and $2 will get me a cup of coffee.
Unless you go to Starbucks.
Yeah.
Yeah, unless I go to Starbucks, that's right.
Dale, since you've been going to these for so long, the annual business meeting, what's the subjects we should be talking to them about or hearing from them about if we go?
Normally they will present, they'll have they present, the financial status and things like that, which, we don't really have to be present to get that information. Generally, it's the annual meeting where most of the activities are, and that's in usually in November, sometimes October.
So do you think it would be better to wait for the annual meeting or to go to the business meeting?
I think it'd be better to wait for the annual meeting.
Okay. Does anybody want to go to
And this business meeting generally is, the staff, the AZOGCC staff is primary participants in that.
Did you guys all get their newsletter? They do an email newsletter, they say AZOGCC sends out like quarterly or semi-annually. Did any of you guys get that? I get it.
I haven't seen it.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I've got to be at the Board of Supervisors hearing now at 12:30. If I leave, would I break the quorum?
No,
No,
because we got
Okay.
3.
We're good. Well, in that case, I can go, but if Dale, I'll go with whatever you think best.
Well, let me talk to Mike Smith, the executive director, and see what he recommends.
Okay.
And then I'll get back to you, Frank.
Thank you. Any other discussion on that? Then let's move on to the call to the public. Anybody have any comments, discussion, questions?
Frank, yes, Joe Dixon, the State Landing Bar. I was going to say when Lee was giving his report, I think he was talking about the St. John CO2 field, and I think he referred to that as Kerr McGee, but it was actually Kinder Morgan.
Okay.
Minor point. I know he saw so much. Every time they flash up something with Ranger with KM on it, I always thought it was Kinder Morgan.
Thank you, Joe. Anybody else?
Frank, I've got one question, and it's more directed toward now. We anticipate the exceptional locations were approved today by the commission, and now you will take that and send the approved permits.
That's right.
To drill, and they will be right away. Is what we.
I can get you, if you want to have something to post on your drill rig, I can get you an e-copy to print out before you get your official mailed copies.
Okay. I just was wondering, so we can coordinate now, drilling contractor, things like that, move forward.
Yeah, it won't be a problem getting those to you.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. Any announcements? Hearing no announcements, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So move.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Carried. We are adjourned.